Have you ever wondered why we still have to work? John Maynard Keynes, the father of modern macroeconomics, whose revolutionary ideas are why we get stimulus checks during recessions, asked this question nearly a century ago in his 1930 essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. The breakneck technological change of the industrial era made humans much more productive, but it also destabilized our social bonds, dehumanized labor, and overheated the global economy, triggering the Great Depression. Keynes diagnosed the social affliction of his day as technological unemployment, where our ability to eliminate outdated jobs outran our ability to create new ones. He predicted not only that this would be a temporary adjustment period that would eventually lead to shared prosperity, but that we'd eventually solve our economic problem entirely if technological breakthroughs continued. In 1930, workers were still fighting for a 40-hour workweek, but Keynes believed that by the year 2030, most people would only need to work 15 hours a week. He envisioned an age of leisure and abundance, where our greatest challenge would be leading meaningful and fulfilling lives without the daily grind of earning basic necessities. So, what happened? Technological progress certainly didn't stop. The average person today lives in unimaginable prosperity compared to 100 years ago, when most households still lacked running water. But most of us still spend half our lives working 40 hours a week, at least. Once we achieved that 40-hour standard, organized labor shifted focus to higher wages and better working conditions, then lost political leverage after the Reagan era. Meanwhile, the promise of higher consumption and increased social status for those who voluntarily worked longer hours drove a culture of workism through the rest of the 20th century and well into the 21st. Because having a stable job today means the difference between economic security and total immiseration, precarious workers demand full employment and more hours. The idea we could have lives of abundance while working less seems like a fantasy. Even the 32-hour workweek struggles to gain traction, let alone Keynes' 15-hour vision. I wouldn't write off Keynes just yet, though. We have 4 long years until 2030, and by the end of the decade, we might be staring down a future without work, whether we're ready or not. A 2023 McKinsey report forecasts that 30% of all work in the US economy will be automatable by 2030, thanks to advances in AI. That number rises to 40 to 50% by 2035, and 50 to 70% by 2040. To be clear, 30% of all work becoming automatable doesn't mean 30% of all jobs will vanish overnight. It means that 30% of what the average person does at work, like scheduling appointments or sending follow-up emails, will be tasks AI tools like ChatGPT can handle. But make no mistake, this process of automation will eliminate many jobs before long. Some jobs will be expected to become 2 or 3 times as productive, limiting available positions, while others will slowly become irrelevant before vanishing entirely. Goldman Sachs researchers predict 50% of current jobs worldwide could be fully displaced by automation within 20 years. And that's the conservative estimate. A blockbuster forecast titled AI 2027 makes a compelling case that virtually all labor could be automated by 2030. That's if the robots don't decide to murder us all first. But that's a topic for another video. Even the conservative estimates would create an economic shock like nothing we've ever seen. Consider what happened to US manufacturing. In 1979, 22% of all American employment was in manufacturing, about 20 million jobs in total. By 2019, that figure had fallen to 9%, or 13 million jobs, down 7 million from its peak. Much of our country is still decimated from that shift. Well-paid factory workers were forced into lower-wage service jobs after plants closed. Others dropped out of the workforce entirely, and opioid overdoses and other deaths of despair spiked as a result. We've had 45 years to help these workers transition with training and placement programs, but many once thriving rural communities are still mired in stagnation. If McKinsey's automation report is accurate, 12 million US jobs will be displaced by AI by 2030. That's nearly twice the manufacturing job loss in a tenth of the time. By 2045, As many as 65 million US jobs will be impacted, a completely unprecedented rate of change. And sure, new technology always eliminates some jobs before creating others. People panicked about the demise of stable hands and carriage drivers when the automobile arrived, not foreseeing the jobs that gas stations and auto repair shops would create. But this time, we're on the verge of destroying jobs much faster than we can dream up new ones. Unlike past waves of what Keynes called technological unemployment, the cognitive work automated by generative AI can be implemented at the flick of a switch. A digital worker can plug into already highly digitized corporate workflows, filling out Monday.com sheets and sending Slack updates like any human employee would, and corporations won't miss a beat. This means change will happen rapidly once the technology matures, too rapidly for us to adapt. White-collar workers are at immediate risk because of the trove of data online showing how we write, think, and perform digital work, a bounty for AIs to train on. It's much harder to get data from the physical world, and that bottleneck protects blue-collar jobs that require sophisticated physical labor. For now, humanoid robots are improving fast, and once the first ones are deployed and start gathering real-world data to train the next generation, automation will come for physical work too. We're in the AI era now. Artificial intelligence is transforming every aspect of our society, from communication to entertainment to romance. We're not waiting for some hypothetical tech breakthrough to make AI viable. Even if today's large language models never improve, and they're improving fast with new capabilities announced weekly, they're already powerful enough to drive mass automation. We've only scratched the surface of what the models can do when properly implemented. We already know they can produce high-quality research reports in minutes, or accurately diagnose medical conditions in an instant. The remaining hurdles for big business are more logistical than technical, and then the displacement will really begin. There's already evidence that tech companies are slowing entry-level hiring as they prepare for an automated workforce. Meta and Google are hiring 25% fewer recent graduates for entry-level roles than a year ago, most likely because those positions are the easiest to automate. Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, claims AI now handles 30 to 50% of his company's workload. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy announced plans to cut their corporate workforce over the next 3 years thanks to AI efficiency gains. Expect most other companies with white-collar workforces to follow suit. Bottom line, we're going to automate away half of all labor within a generation, much faster than we can create new uses for that labor. Neither office workers nor factory workers are safe, to say nothing of artists, doctors, cashiers, and truck drivers. Eventually, AI is coming for every job that exists. And then what? If your career appears to be on the automation shopping block, these are probably terrifying statistics. I know they are for me. But then I turn to a quote from sci-fi author Ted Chiang that's become like a truism for me. Most of our fears or anxieties about technology are best understood as fears or anxiety about how capitalism will use technology against us. And technology and capitalism have been so closely intertwined that it's hard to distinguish the two. Capitalism is the water we swim in, and thinking about life without it can be as mind-boggling as a fish imagining life on land. But join me in that thought experiment for a moment. How would you feel about AI in a world where your quality of life wasn't tied to your ability to make money? Imagine a world where breakthroughs in efficient renewable energy end our reliance on fossil fuels and solve the environmental crisis, providing virtually limitless clean energy for all. AI and robotics companies take advantage of these breakthroughs to automate society's most unpleasant and repetitive jobs. In this world, writes author Aaron Bastani, we could lead lives equivalent to that of today's billionaires. Luxury will pervade everything, as society based on waged work becomes as much a relic as the feudal peasant. His famous formulation for this world? Fully automated luxury communism. In this society, 3D printed steaks end factory farming, asteroid mineral mining ensures plentiful resources, and AI-powered genetic research dramatically extends our health and longevity, all without any of us having to work. Even Bastani admits in his 2019 book of the same name that fully automated luxury communism feels impossible to imagine happening in our lifetime. However, he argues the impossible aspect isn't the technological leap required to make such a world possible, but our ability to overcome a corporate stranglehold on technological development. Technology itself has advanced by leaps and bounds just since 2019, but it's hard to picture the fruits of automation ever being broadly distributed for the common good. Decades of privatization have gutted the government's capacity to create the tools of automation independently. So the tools we have are shaped by capitalist incentives. Capitalist firms, organized around selling scarce goods for profit, will treat broad abundance as a threat and attempt to ration it by securing monopoly control over automation, then putting up paywalls around those services. We're so accustomed to this logic that a kind of ideological fatalism is set in, where we can't imagine things playing out any other way. Socialists often have an anti-tech reputation because technological innovation is so associated with unrestrained, unregulated capitalism. The trick of fully automated luxury communism is that it disarms capitalist logic not by slowing down technological development, but by accelerating it while socializing it. Bastani is being deliberately funny with that catchphrase, but today's technology could make Marxist governance work in ways that were infeasible during the Soviet era. For example, retailers like Amazon and Walmart now manage and optimize billions of data points to determine how to price their inventory and exactly when and where it should move. Writers like Lee Phillips and Michal Razworski have argued that democratic states could copy the Amazon model to implement a Soviet-style planned economy. The complex calculations that doomed 20th century planned economies are now possible with distributed cloud computing. Fully automated luxury communism is the ultimate expression of technological abundance without capitalism. Bastani doesn't offer a detailed roadmap, but he has ideas to make the early rewards of automation accessible to all. A sweeping plan to make transit, broadband, energy, and food staples free at the point of service, followed by rapid development of social housing, all driven by tons of public investment in renewable energy and open source automation development. He argues we must rebuild the state's capacity to provide for its citizens now, so we're prepared to expand public benefits as labor gradually becomes untethered from wages. Bastani's ideas appeal even to many who typically recoil from anything with communism in the title, because he paints such an indelible picture of abundance for all. It's telling that Bastani is approvingly quoted in the opening chapter of this year's defining political text, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's Abundance. Klein and Thompson's paean to government efficiency is more liberal than anti-capitalist, envisioning abundance as a partnership between capital and a supercharged state. Their key interest is procedural, cutting red tape and neutralizing interest groups blocking progress to make building public works as easy as possible. Few of Klein and Thompson's ideas are objectionable, and most of them would make government function more effectively. But it's a wonky, narrow book that's either unable or unwilling to engage with the deeper implications of a world filled with technological plenty. While they open with a description of a hypothetical post-scarcity world seemingly modeled directly on Bastani's vision, down to the space factories and lab-grown meat, they don't actually want an economic revolution. So they settle for selling a dreamland that's a lot like today, only with cooler stuff. Like Bastani, they strongly advocate for more public investment in tech R&D and increasing state capacity. They clearly understand the political appeal of harnessing technology to build something like Keynes' Age of Leisure, but they can't imagine a world without work. It's tempting to predict a Jetsonian future that looks much like our present, only with robot maids and flying cars we use to commute to work at the Sprocket factory. It's easier to grasp, and it's certainly an easier sell to our current political leaders. Many people have no problem with capitalism per se, and we may even love our jobs. But like it or not, the late capitalist status quo is not going to survive a head-on collision with mass automation. Nick Cernicek and Alex Williams illustrate this point sharply in their 2015 book Inventing the Future, arguing that the modern economy is already faltering. pushing more and more people out of stable employment well before the advent of AI. So in every market economy, there's a group of people who want employment but can't find it, and you can't eliminate that group entirely. This surplus population left out of the workforce usually expands when economic demand falls, then shrinks again when demand rises. However, over the last few decades, advances in productivity have allowed corporations to maintain growth with fewer and fewer workers, shedding jobs over time without slowing the economy. Meanwhile, globalization has added billions of exploitable workers to the labor pool, forcing them to work long hours at wages that undercut workers in developed economies. These dynamics have pushed the growth of the global surplus population well beyond the usual boom and bust cycle. This group, which includes the unemployed, underemployed, gig workers, historically marginalized groups, and the disabled, makes up 61% of the global working age population by some counts, outnumbering the formal working class. This giant surplus population allows corporations to exert tremendous power over workers, threatening them with expulsion to the surplus rump if they don't toe the line. But it also creates social volatility, turning entire cities into poverty traps, and creating an angry, restive population prone to dissent and disorder. No skills training program will fix this. There simply aren't enough jobs to absorb this entire population now. AI-enabled mass automation would accelerate this dynamic exponentially, potentially ballooning the permanently unemployed surplus to billions of people worldwide. This would push half the world's workers into what historian Yuval Harari calls the useless class. The social contract that makes capitalism function depends on most people being valuable to the labor market as workers or potential workers. When billions of people suddenly have no value to the capitalist system, that system has no need to provide for them and no social role for them to play. A government captured by capital won't provide more than the bare minimum safety net to prevent mass revolts, at best. Meanwhile, the shrinking group still toiling at jobs that haven't been automated, but not sharing in the hoarded riches of a tidy cadre of elites, will grow increasingly resentful of the so-called useless class. That surplus class will likewise turn their anger towards the workers who still have the social status that employment grants. As economist Joan Robinson wrote, "The misery of being exploited by capitalists is nothing compared to the misery of not being exploited at all." These grotesque conditions are inherently unstable, a tinderbox that will eventually spark transformation into something entirely new, for better or worse. Our institutions are not prepared for a world dominated by the useless class. We've never faced a crash in the demand for labor on this scale. When most people have no opportunity to participate in the capitalist system, it becomes an unbalanced equilibrium, doomed to collapse. But what does it collapse into? That's the question Peter Frase explores in his book, For Futures, Life After Capitalism. Frase synthesizes concerns over climate change and mass automation with a dash of science fiction to sketch out the 4 likeliest outcomes once capitalism stops functioning, depending on how the political winds blow. Frase plots his 4 futures on a simple 2x2 grid. One axis is hierarchy versus equality. Will we share resources equally or preserve the class divisions of the old world? The other axis is abundance versus scarcity. Basically, will climate-fueled catastrophe put hard limits on our resources, or will mass automation enable plenty for everyone? In the decades since 4 Futures was published, we've made significant progress in fighting the climate threat. Thanks to collective emission pledges, clean tech innovations like cost-effective batteries, and major renewable energy investments from the US, China, and the EU, fossil fuel usage is on track to peak before 2030. We're likely to avoid the worst climate change scenarios. But global temperatures are still rising, and climate-fueled disasters are snowballing. AI's power and water demands have been the source of a lot of controversy. While its current footprint is still relatively small, that could change as AI usage explodes. Frase's grid accounts for the possibility that our thirst for precious resources will spiral out of control before we achieve true abundance. In the first future, where equality meets abundance, we avoid climate catastrophe and share the bounty of technological progress equally. This scenario is essentially fully automated luxury communism, or to use Fraze's term, Star Trek socialism. Facing the possibility of billions of unemployed people and collapsing markets, world leaders place AI companies into a public commons and expand the welfare state to make basic necessities free. Soon, the cost of nearly all goods and services drops to zero. Everything is democratically owned, and work becomes voluntary and untethered from survival, since obtaining whatever you need is effortless. That's the good outcome. The second future, where hierarchy meets abundance, is what Fraze calls rentism. Here, a small class of rentier capitalists circle the wagons around the automation services they own, while they still can. After the labor market collapses, these rent seekers demand paid subscriptions to technological abundance from the jobless masses, hiring an army of private police to enforce the arrangement. This is the future that looks most like our present, but it's unstable for the same reason our present is unstable. What happens when the jobless masses can't afford OpenAI subscriptions? How long can elite resentment build before it boils over? This outcome delays revolt against the capitalists for a while, allowing them to keep profiting for another few years, maybe decades, but rentism will inevitably mutate into one of the other three futures. In the third future, where equality meets scarcity, mass automation sputters, and the promise of abundance never fully comes to pass. Maybe climate disasters or a new pandemic push civilization back to an earlier era. Or maybe AI development hits an unforeseen wall and economic growth grinds to a halt. However, the resulting global crisis prompts world leaders to embrace egalitarian reforms. Patient, sustainable rebuilding, focused on establishing universal quality of life instead of unchecked growth, allows us to reset and get back on track, providing reasonably well for all, along the lines of Nordic social democracy. It's no age of leisure, but it's not so bad. It's an optimistic scenario where a worldwide emergency brings out the best in humanity. But then there's the fourth future, where hierarchy meets scarcity. Exterminism. In this future, resources are scarce for most people, whether due to extreme climate change or plain old greed from an unshakable elite class hoarding 99% of everything. With mass automation providing abundance for these elites, workers have become superfluous, an inconvenient class they don't know what to do with. At first, they try creating a meager welfare scheme for the former working class, but it's totally insufficient and doesn't quiet demands for more. Eventually, deeming them ungrateful, the elites break off from the global economy and form their own society, building fortresses to guard their resources and leaving the useless class to fight for scraps. If the rich feel sufficiently threatened by the unruly, starving masses, they'll deploy drones and private militias to surveil and discipline them, or force them into camps or prisons. Eventually, they may decide it's simply easier to kill them. Post-work futurists are often accused of utopian thinking, or being idealistic to the point of naivete about what's possible. The smartest aspect of Fraze's four futures is that none of them are utopias. Some, like exterminism, are obvious dystopias, but even the Star Trek future isn't paradise. Fraze takes pains to illustrate the concussive impact of suddenly living without work to structure our days. How will we find meaning? Would we become lost, anxious, depressed, unable to get out of bed in the morning without a clear daily mission? Would we actually create a world without hierarchy? Or would the ancient hierarchies of racism and sexism take center stage? Or would we create new hierarchies based around different forms of social capital, whether fame or beauty or IQ or Riz? Would the world be beautiful, or will we drown in AI slop? Would enough people volunteer for the few jobs remaining, including robot technicians and care workers for the human patients that demand a human touch? Who fights our wars, assuming we haven't eliminated the human drive to wage them? And unavoidably, what happens if the intelligent automatons we create become too powerful to control? Fraze addresses these concerns by quoting political scientist Corey Robin. We should think of the end of waged work not as a solution to all social ills, but as a way to convert hysterical misery into ordinary unhappiness. The struggle to create meaningful lives is serious and real, but it's also a luxury problem. If that's our biggest concern after we've ended global hunger and housing insecurity, saving everyone from the desperate grip of poverty, that'll be a more than worthy trade. Life in an automated world would pose unprecedented challenges, demanding new laws and social norms around AI use. Guardrails not only to prevent existential risk from killer robots, but to preserve the human touch in our environment. Slop, for example, is already a pressing concern, as thoughtless, ugly AI-created media takes over social networks like an invasive species. In the short term, we might create spaces, both digital and physical, where people interact only with humans and human-created art. Then, hopefully, without capitalism's corrupting influence, without ever-present algorithms driven by monetizing attention, when there's no profit in pumping out a fire hose of weird nonsense, we can be more intentional about using AI to make beautiful things. Maybe we'll even unlock new kinds of AI-assisted creativity we've never dreamed of. Learning how to live with AI-driven abundance while avoiding widespread confusion, overwhelm, and melancholy will require solving many thorny problems like this. When I use today's generative AI tools, I feel something like vertigo. It's an experience of awe and terror in equal measure. Like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff and I'm forcing myself to look down. As a writer, as a creative person, my ability to think and create is at the very heart of what makes me me. Seeing machines come so close to thinking and creating like I do, threatening to surpass me, is existentially destabilizing. When I see my friends and loved ones reacting to the growing ubiquity of AI with everything from curiosity to dismissal to anger to panic, I know they're wrestling with that same vertigo, processing it in their own ways. The human thirst for knowledge has been interpreted as a kind of death drive, at least as far back as the Garden of Eden. After Eve ate that apple, humanity became irrevocably changed, doomed to wander, fight, suffer, and die. But attempting to stay in the garden forever, knowing the tree of knowledge is right there, is inhuman in its own way. The more we offload labor to AI, the more some domains that once felt uniquely ours, like art or analytical thought, won't feel so special. But new frontiers of human ingenuity we couldn't see before will reveal themselves. Meanwhile, if we play our cards right, we could be on the verge of solving what we thought were endemic failures of humanity, like poverty and toil. It's worth resisting the reflex to shun AI, worth leaning into the vertigo of it, to reach for the stars and make our best possible future a reality. Our window to actualize the good future is already closing. So much depends on the next few years. The age of leisure is tantalizingly close, but how do we get from here to there? The futurists I've covered, from Bastani to Frase to Srdíček and Williams, are clear. The greatest obstacle ahead isn't technological, it's political. What's more, the people leading AI development agree with them. OpenAI's Sam Altman testified to Congress in 2023 that if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong, and we want to work with the government to prevent that from happening. Google's Sundar Pichai told 60 Minutes, "How do you develop AI systems that are aligned to human values? The development of this needs to include not just engineers, but social scientists, ethicists, philosophers, and so on. These are all things society needs to figure out as we move along." Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella said at Davos, "Regulation that allows us to ensure that the broad societal benefits are amplified and the unintended consequences are dampened is going to be the way forward." Now look, are some of these tech giants saying this cynically, trying to let their companies off the hook if their products cause harm? Undoubtedly. Do these sentiments conflict with reports that tech CEOs lobbied Congress behind the scenes to pass a 10-year federal ban on state AI regulation? I'd say so. Did Sam Altman change his tune when he testified to Congress again this year, arguing for the government to take a hands-off approach? He sure did. But here's the thing. Everything they said is true, even if they were being completely insincere. They apparently hope someone else, like the government, will solve the problems their technology creates, but simultaneously want zero government intervention at all. After years of tech scandals, privacy violations, and shitification and misinformation, the titans of Silicon Valley have rightfully lost the public's trust. The average person has come to feel that for all the convenience of smartphones and social networks, technology has made our lives smaller, sadder, and lonelier. And tech companies clearly don't have our best interests at heart. Companies like Meta that sideline their ethics teams to make their products as addictive as possible cannot regulate themselves for the common good. And frankly, that shouldn't be their responsibility. That burden belongs to democratically elected leaders who understand the cultural and social consequences of technology more than these tunnel vision STEM guys obsessed with making number go up. In the right hands, with the right approach, AI can provide phenomenal benefits for the world. We have a right to vote on who chooses that approach. Whether they fully internalize their public statements or not, these CEOs are begging to share control of AI with representatives of the users they claim to serve. They should be relieved of carrying that responsibility alone. So democratic intervention in AI is imperative, but we need more than intervention. We need a plan. The goal isn't to kill tech development, but to ensure it's serving people's needs and moves us closer to the post-work future. Srdicek and Williams conclude their book Inventing the Future with 4 political demands to make post-work a reality. 4 futures, 4 demands. These guys love thinking in 4s. First, go pedal to the metal towards a fully automated economy. They call for pushing automation as far as possible. If AI really can deliver free goods and services while making labor irrelevant, let's use public subsidies and tax breaks to accelerate that process. As long as we proceed safely enough to avoid the true doom scenarios, see AI 2027 for more on that, moving quickly matters to make these sweeping promises concrete. We need to show a public jaded towards technology that a fully automated world really is possible. Now, we've already seen that making labor irrelevant without ensuring former laborers share in the post-AI bounty leads to dystopian levels of poverty. That's where the second demand comes in. UBI, or Universal Basic Income. UBI is probably the most famous policy proposal to address automation's consequences, championed by everyone from leftist economist Thomas Piketty to Sam Altman to former presidential candidate Andrew Yang, whose plan to give a $1,000 monthly stipend to all Americans helped make the concept mainstream. UBI's great virtue is its simplicity. Take all the profit from automation and distribute it equally through weekly or monthly checks. Easy to understand, easy to sell to voters. Now, someone like Bastani would rather guarantee UBS or universal basic services like free education and healthcare before implementing UBI. That's a worthy debate, but we could attack this from both sides, eventually offering some version of both. UBI is a solid starting point, and in its purest form, it's a powerful tool to start decoupling a living wage from the need to work. However, not all UBI proposals are created equal. Some advocates propose a UBI that replaces all other welfare, essentially becoming a tax on those who rely on things like Medicaid or disability income. Others want to load it up with paperwork and preconditions, SNAP-style restrictions on what you can and can't buy. Srdicek and Williams are clear. Only a UBI that is sufficient to cover a living wage, unconditional, universal, and supplements existing welfare programs will do. In fact, some of Silicon Valley's most influential voices are extremely skeptical of UBI, despite the rhetoric about providing for those disrupted by automation. If everyone gets UBI, they claim, no one will bother researching new scientific ideas, building new technology, or contributing to human progress. Take venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, who writes in his 2023 Techno-Optimist Manifesto, "We believe a universal basic income would turn people into zoo animals to be farmed by the state. Man was not meant to be farmed. Man was meant to be useful, to be productive, to be proud. Andreessen's dream future isn't one where we've moved beyond work, but one where everyone's a founder with an AI-powered startup. I don't think I need to spell out why letting 8 billion AI startups bloom is unlikely to work out for the vast majority of them. But it takes a tremendous failure of imagination to assume that everyone will become a lazy lump if they don't have to work for survival. Sure, most people won't spend all their time advancing human progress without a profit motive, but most people aren't doing that today either. In fact, with free education and ample leisure time, more people would have the security to pursue such lofty goals. We don't need a cutthroat system of financial winners and losers to motivate people to leave their mark on the world. Needless to say, without a politically strong working class advocating for them, UBI programs will be undermined by skeptics inside and outside government until they only provide bare minimum benefits. With this in mind, the third demand harkens back to Keynes, renewing calls for a shortened work week. They suggest labor leaders pivot from fighting for wage increases towards fighting for more personal time with the same weekly compensation, establishing a statutory 32-hour work week and 3-day weekend. Shortening the standard week forces companies to hire more people, boosting individual workers' bargaining power. It also ensures plenty of jobs available throughout this transitional period while AI-driven automation rolls out, even as Srdíček and Williams hope those hours eventually shrink to zero. Some unions have been fighting automation to protect their interests, but they'd embrace it more easily if the labor saved by automation becomes hours saved by their members. A 3-day weekend will also allow workers to take more advantage of leisure, preparing them for Srdíček and Williams' fourth and final demand, a mass cultural shift away from workism, devaluing labor as the primary source of identity and social status. They write, "Work and the suffering that accompanies it should not be glorified. A shortened work week won't happen if workers happily volunteer for overtime to advance their careers, or if everyone uses their free hours for second jobs or side hustles. Since 2015, it feels like the shift has already begun, especially among younger generations. But it will take a concerted effort over many years to invest our collective energy into projects not tied to profit, especially in America, where workism is practically a national religion. Over time, once voters grasp that extreme supply makes their work unnecessary, cultural norms around private profit will melt away." These 4 demands don't work in isolation. They need to be tied together as a political platform to prevent automation from leading directly to snowballing inequality and the exterminist future. On top of that, I would add a 5th demand to the Srdíček and Williams platform: democratic control of the AI companies driving automation, if not through out-and-out nationalization, then through significant third-party oversight. Inventing the Future discusses using public funds to incentivize tech companies to make pro-social products, but AI development is too far along for that to be sufficient. The computer scientist Andrej Karpathy has observed that large language models function a lot like utilities. AI companies spend capital building and maintaining models, then charge for metered access to the model's intelligence, the same way governments commission power plants, then charge metered access to electricity. Like electricity, we should treat intelligence as a commodity, raw material for automation projects. We can take inspiration from the way utilities are regulated, placing AI companies under something like public utility commissions to manage them without crushing innovation. Treating AI like other utilities would ensure access to intelligence is universal and distributed equitably, while mitigating against bias and misalignment. Proper oversight would also push the brilliant developers behind these models to build socially beneficial features, not just profitable ones. For example, this might include developing cryptographically verifiable watermark standards for generated images and video to defend against misinformation and deepfakes. We can also push for democratic measures like public ownership of training data, placing workers' councils and civic representatives on AI company boards, and vastly expanding the public domain with strong time limits on IP protections, especially around code, to prevent endless rent-seeking and encourage open-source development. It's not easy to mobilize voters against a hypothetical threat that's years or decades away, no matter how strong your case or how dire your warnings. Just look at what happened to the Green New Deal. Voters didn't care about neutralizing climate change or the creation of millions of new jobs when they were fixated on the possibility of losing hamburgers. This is an aspirational set of policies that can be paired with tested ideas that offer immediate relief, like expanded unemployment benefits, restoring the child tax credit, and portable benefits for underemployed gig workers. This gives workers insurance against displacement and the security to test the waters of leaving their job. The emphasis is on personal freedom, giving all working Americans the chance to make the choice that's right for them, because the state won't let them fall through the cracks. And this is where you have to hand it to Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, even if I think their vision is limited. We urgently need to restore the government's capacity to do big things, unhampered by bureaucracy, in order to restore civic trust with a population that no longer believes public services can work effectively. A vision of an abundant future, paired with a government that can quickly roll out robust services, is the only shot we have. The truth is, if we want to seize this moment, we don't have a second to lose. A 2024 Brookings report shows that in Europe, workers impacted by automation-driven job displacement over the last decade were more likely to vote for right-wing populist parties, express anti-immigrant sentiment, and turn to cultural nostalgia to explain their lost social status. We've started to see that effect in America this year as the MAGA right persecutes immigrants while mounting a doomed effort to resurrect the 1970s manufacturing economy through tariffs. However, countries with strong unemployment benefits and worker protections can reduce this rightward drift and even make it disappear. There is an antidote to this poisonous nostalgia. We know the factory jobs aren't coming back, and that they weren't great to begin with. They may have paid well, but they were grueling and repetitive. We can channel the populist energy leaking to the right towards the promise of lifelong security and prosperity, but only if we aren't afraid to engage with AI. We can't dismiss everyone who uses it as losers or grifters just because the current wave of AI culture is right-coded. There are a lot of grifters, to be sure, and there's even more bad art as people without a creative bone in their body gain access to powerful new image-making tools for the first time. But if you think it's nothing but a grift or a sham, you're sticking your head in the sand. The dangers of AI are real, but so is the opportunity. Refusing to find positive uses for AI cedes the future of the most transformative technology in a generation to the corporate elite. If we push for democratic oversight of AI, a strong UBI program, shorter work weeks, and cultural leaders who can lay the foundation for a post-work world, we don't have to treat mass automation with fear and loathing. We can learn how to harness AI, then leverage its capabilities to deliver abundance for all. Politicians from the left to the right have barely begun to take this challenge seriously. Alarm bells are clanging around us. It's clearer and clearer where this is all heading, and no one in power is really discussing a plan. They're waiting for the signal that everyday people care about this. We have to lead the charge. In many ways, our biggest obstacles are mental. Of Srdíček and Williams' four demands, the one I personally struggle with most is the plea to stop prioritizing work above all else. I'm a proud hard worker and ambitious. I believe a strong work ethic is a moral virtue, proving you're willing to give your time and energy and even suffer a little bit for the needs of others. Everything good about today's world was built on the hard work of our ancestors, and the work we do for each other will still hold great social value, even after wage labor is automated away. But I also see the demand to deprioritize work as a challenge, a reason to ask yourself if your daily grind really serves a greater purpose, or whether your noble desire to work hard is being exploited for ignoble ends. If your job wasn't rewarded with money and status, would you still see the good in doing it for its own sake? For many of us, the answer is yes, and we'd happily volunteer to do something like our job today in an automated world. But think about all the bullshit jobs capitalism rewards highly that have little or no social impact, to say nothing of actively evil jobs. Think of hustle culture and influencer culture, all the valorized forms of work that amount to little more than solipsism and personal brand building. Then think about all the valuable social activity that doesn't turn a profit, that must be subsidized or taken up by volunteers. Domestic labor, caregiving, community outreach, mutual aid, issue advocacy, speculative scientific research, philosophical inquiry, art, music, athletics. So many of us want to spend more time on these pursuits or these forms of care, but our time is monopolized by the questionable work we do for survival. If you think you couldn't handle life without the structure and status work brings, imagine living as a disabled person today. Only 36% of working-age disabled people worldwide are employed. Most already know what it's like to be permanently excluded from the working world and the stigma that comes with it. But disabled people are also at the forefront of using cutting-edge technology in novel ways. They understand the emancipation technology can offer when it's developed to prioritize accessibility over profit. Disability justice activists fight today for a right not to work, asserting their inherent value in a society that relentlessly ties worth to productivity. Their experiences can guide us as we build a post-work future that puts people first. Once we separate work from livelihood, we can make more informed decisions about where our talents will make the greatest difference, and direct our fundamental need to contribute to our community towards more socially positive ends. I do think we've made progress on this demand since 2015, with Gen Z leading the way in forming identities beyond their career and leading more balanced lives. As an elder millennial, I sometimes struggle to wrap my head around how my life would work if I wasn't perpetually propelled forward by career concerns, if I'd just tip over like a wind-up toy that's out of gas. But I know I'd like to find out, if only to strip away that careerist part of myself and see what's underneath. I believe with time and grace for each other's disorientation, we can solve the hard problem of living meaningful lives without labor in the automation age. We'll also need to grapple with the potential of AI to reinforce misinformation and bias, or simply flood the zone with slop. The possibility that heavy cognitive offloading to AI could atrophy our critical thinking. How to sustainably manage AI's natural resource consumption. The uneven global pace of change as developed countries achieve full automation before developing ones. And an ever-present existential risk as we enter uncharted technological waters. As a species, we are playing with Promethean fire, but the alternative, pretending AI doesn't exist and we can safely ignore it, is no longer an option. AI is too useful and has become an ingrained habit for like half the country in record time. ChatGPT alone already has over 800 million weekly users. The real naivete is assuming we can just putter along as we face a totalizing future shock. Love capitalism or hate it, it won't survive what's coming. Socialism and barbarism are the only two paths ahead, and we have to do everything in our power to take the better path. No less a figure than Bernie Sanders posted recently, with the explosion of AI, new technology, and increased worker productivity, we should demand a shorter work week, increased life expectancy, and a decent standard of living for all. The benefits of AI must go to working families, not just high-tech CEOs. He's got the right perspective, and the policy platform is there for the taking. Who has the foresight to run for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2028 and make the post-work future their top priority? Who will make John Maynard Keynes' century-old prediction for an age of leisure come true right at the buzzer? Who will turn Star Trek into Star Fact? Because by 2030, this will probably be the most important issue humanity faces. And if we don't have leaders prepared to face it head on, we're fucked. This is easily the longest essay I've ever written, and the most political I've ever gotten on Maine. If you liked this video and you want to see more videos like it, hit the like button, comment, share it with your friends. And if you want to watch me nerd out about the podcast industry in a less existentially terrifying way, go check out the rest of my channel.